You'd freeze to death without this Stone Age secret: the wind is a knife. It cuts deeper than bone. Your breath turns to ice before it leaves your lips. In the endless darkness of the Ice Age, fire alone isn't enough, and the animals you hunt are as desperate as you are. But hidden in the coldest corners of the earth, our ancestors discovered a secret, a method so ingenious, so vital, that without it, they would have frozen in days. And here's the part that will surprise you. Without that same secret, you wouldn't be alive today. The world that wanted us dead, the Ice Age, was not a season. It was not a bad winter. It was a prison made of ice, and for tens of thousands of years, it was the only world humans knew. Imagine it: a horizon smothered in white, the sky a dull, frozen gray. The ground beneath your feet is so hard it breaks the edges of your tools. The wind doesn't just blow, it howls like a predator circling the camp, tearing at your skin until it's raw. And the cold. The cold was not just a feeling, it was a living enemy. It crept into your bones, slowed your heartbeat, and whispered to you that closing your eyes would be the sweetest relief. For our ancestors, every sunrise was a gamble. Would they find food before the hunger became unbearable? Would they keep the fire burning before the night closed in? Would they make it to another day? Or would the land take them? The Ice Age didn't care about your strength. It didn't care about your intelligence. It had wiped out entire species before you, and it would gladly do the same again. Fire was essential, but fire alone was not enough. It gave warmth, but it couldn't follow you when you left camp to hunt. It couldn't protect you when the wind was strong enough to blow embers into darkness. And when fuel was scarce, the fire itself became another thing you had to fight to keep alive. Food was survival, but hunting in the Ice Age was like playing dice with death. The great beasts you pursued, mammoths, bison, woolly rhinoceroses, could kill you with a single blow. And if you failed, you didn't just go hungry, you froze faster. Without food, your body lost the heat it needed to stay alive. This was a world where mistakes were punished immediately. Leave your shelter unprotected, and a snowstorm would bury it before you returned. Misread the weather, and you'd be caught in whiteout conditions so blinding you couldn't see your own hands. And yet, despite this merciless reality, our ancestors survived. Not just survived, they thrived enough to leave their mark on time itself. How? It wasn't strength that saved them. It wasn't even just fire. It was something else. Something they could carry with them. Something that made their bodies resist the cold in ways no other creature on Earth could match. But before that secret was mastered, before it was passed down through generations, humanity was walking a knife's edge between life and extinction. The next storm could have been the last. And in those desperate days, nature itself would give them the first hint, a quiet lesson hidden in the wild, waiting for the ones clever enough to notice. The first hint didn't come from a tool or a fire. It came from watching. The people of the Ice Age were not distracted the way we are now. They didn't have screens, noise, or schedules. They had time, long, silent hours, to simply look. And what they saw in those endless white landscapes was more than just survival. It was instruction. They watched the wolves. They watched the reindeer. They watched the great shaggy bison and the foxes that padded silently across the snow. Even in the worst of storms, these animals did not shiver themselves to death. They endured. They moved. Why? The answer was in their fur, yes, but it was also in something less obvious. The hunters noticed how certain animals seemed to carry the cold differently. They didn't fight it the same way humans did, where humans wrapped themselves in firelight and huddled in caves. These creatures seemed to wear their protection everywhere they went. For the hunters, this was more than curiosity. It was survival intelligence. You didn't just hunt to eat, you hunted to learn. Every kill was an autopsy of the wild. Skinning an animal wasn't just about food and clothing. It was about discovery. You learned how the layers of fur trapped air, how the hide held heat even after death, how the fat beneath acted as a shield from the cold. Fat. That was the real revelation. To us today, fat is something we burn off in gyms, something we label as unhealthy. But to Ice Age humans, it was liquid gold. It was not just calories, it was warmth. When eaten, it fueled the body longer than meat alone. When stored on the body, it slowed the cold's grip, and in certain cases, it could even be used to make fire burn longer, brighter, and more fiercely against the darkness. But there was still a gap. Watching animals gave them ideas, but ideas alone don't keep you alive when the temperature drops to -40. They needed a way to take this knowledge from observation to action, to make it part of human life, not just something they admired from a distance. That's when patterns began to form. The hunters who took the thickest hides, who preserved the most fat, who layered protection not just at night but during the day. These were the ones who returned to camp alive. Those who didn't became stories whispered by the fire. Nature had given its first lesson. The question now was whether humans would take it far enough. Because in the Ice Age, survival wasn't about doing one thing well. It was about weaving together every scrap of knowledge, every borrowed trick, every stolen advantage from the creatures that ruled the land. And the real breakthrough, the moment that turned survival into security, was still ahead. It was the predator they could never ignore, the wolf. To the Ice Age tribes, wolves were both rivals and teachers. They hunted the same prey, roamed the same frozen plains, and shared the same constant hunger. A wolf pack could track a herd for days through snow so deep it swallowed a man to the knee. Even when storms buried the land in blinding white, the wolves moved with purpose, never lost, never still for long. For humans, the wolf was more than a threat. It was a living blueprint. Hunters began to notice how wolves rested. They didn't lie exposed on the ice. They curled into tight, compact shapes, wrapping their tails over their noses to trap warm breath. They chose sleeping spots out of the wind, often on small rises where cold air didn't settle. Their movement patterns were efficient. No wasted energy, no unnecessary detours. But there was something else. Wolves never seemed to be caught off guard by sudden weather changes. They moved to shelter before the worst winds hit, hunted just before a snowstorm, and rested when the cold was at its most dangerous. To understand them, hunters began following them, not to kill, but to learn. What they discovered was more than instinct, it was strategy. The wolves' survival wasn't just a matter of fur and muscle, it was a combination of preparation, awareness, and cooperation. And cooperation was the lesson humans could take further than any other creature. Like wolves, humans worked in groups. But unlike wolves, humans could adapt their tools, their clothing, their shelters with each new lesson learned. They could carry knowledge forward, shaping it into something greater than any one generation could discover alone. It was during one of these long tracking journeys that a group of hunters made an observation that would change everything. After a kill, wolves didn't just eat muscle meat, they devoured the fat, the organs, and the marrow from deep inside the bones. These parts were rich in energy and warmth-sustaining nutrients. The hunters realized that they had been wasting some of the most valuable parts of the animals they hunted. From then on, they began cracking bones to drink the marrow, saving every scrap of fat, and even using stomach linings as insulated pouches to carry supplies. This wasn't just food, it was portable heat, stored in the body and carried through the coldest days. The picture was becoming clearer. Fur and hides for insulation, fat and marrow for long-lasting warmth, movement, and breathing to control body heat, awareness to anticipate danger. But these were still separate pieces of a puzzle. The true Stone Age secret, the one that made humans unstoppable in the cold, would fuse all of these lessons into a single, unified survival strategy. And it was about to be born in the frozen heart of winter. Mastering the cold, the storm had raged for 3 days. Snow swallowed the land. The wind was a voice of pure hunger, tearing at every seam of the shelter. Inside, the tribe huddled in darkness, their fire reduced to faint embers. For most creatures, this would have been the end. But these were not the same humans who had once waited helplessly for the cold to pass. They had been collecting lessons, piece by piece, for generations. And now, those lessons were ready to merge into something far greater. The breakthrough began not with a tool, but with a realization. Cold could be managed, not merely escaped. Instead of treating survival as a desperate reaction to the weather, the tribe began planning for the cold as if it were a campaign, a war fought on multiple fronts. They combined every method they had learned into one seamless system. First came anticipation. They no longer waited for the first snow to fall before preparing in late summer. They began gathering thick hides, storing fat, and reinforcing shelters. They read the wind and the light like a map, predicting shifts in weather before they arrived. Second was layered protection. They had refined their clothing into an art form. An inner layer of soft, insulating fur, a middle layer of hide to trap air, and a heavy outer skin to block the wind. Gaps were sealed with sinew stitching so tight no breeze could slip through. Even their footwear was lined with dried grass for insulation, a trick stolen from observing reindeer nests. Third was portable fuel. Fat was no longer just eaten, it was stored and hardened. Portable forms, frozen chunks wrapped in hide, or pouches made from stomach lining. This walking fire meant they carried warmth with them, inside their bodies, wherever they went. A single handful could keep a hunter moving for hours in deadly cold. Fourth was strategic movement. They learned to pace themselves on hunts, using bursts of speed only when needed, and resting in wind-sheltered areas to avoid sweating. They moved like wolves, conserving heat as much as energy. And finally, there was the shelter code. They no longer relied solely on caves. They learned to build windbreaks from snow and ice, to dig shallow pits that trapped warmer air, and to angle openings away from prevailing winds. Even in the open tundra, they could create pockets of safety in a matter of hours. Individually, none of these methods were new, but together, they formed the Stone Age secret, a way of living that turned humans into the only primates on Earth capable of thriving in the world's most lethal cold. And once this strategy took root, humanity's reach expanded. The ice was no longer a wall, it was a road. Once the cold was no longer an unstoppable enemy, it became something far more interesting, an advantage. For most predators, deep winter meant scarcity. Food was harder to find, prey was leaner, and the bitter wind sapped strength faster than hunger could be satisfied. But for humans, the cold was now a weapon they could use against their rivals. They began to time their hunts for when their prey was weakest. A mammoth struggling through deep snow was easier to bring down. A reindeer slowed by frozen ground could be tracked for days. The cold no longer worked against them, it worked for them. This was the turning point. The Stone Age secret wasn't just about keeping warm. It was about reshaping the balance of power in the wild. And that power started to show in how far humans could travel. Before, the tribe's range had been limited by the need for shelter and fuel. Now, with portable heat stored in fat, with hides that could resist wind like armor, and with the ability to create instant shelters from snow, they could push farther into unclaimed lands. These were places no other humans and few predators dared to go. In these untouched regions, they found new hunting grounds, rich with herds that had never seen a spear. They discovered rivers that froze solid enough to walk across, opening paths to territories far beyond what their ancestors had imagined. The ice, once a barrier, became a bridge. Their confidence grew. Each successful expedition taught them more, not just about surviving the cold, but about owning it. They began storing specific hides for specific purposes. Fox for flexibility, bison for brute insulation, mammoth for wind-blocking walls. They experimented with combining furs, creating garments that balanced warmth with mobility. Fire, too, evolved in their hands. They learned how to burn fat alongside wood, creating a steady, long-lasting flame even when fuel was scarce. They could carry embers wrapped in insulating moss, allowing them to reignite fire without flint or spark. This meant they could move without fear of losing their only source of heat. But perhaps the most telling sign of mastery was their change in mindset. Where once the tribe feared winter's arrival, they began to prepare for it with anticipation, even excitement. Winter meant less competition, fewer rival predators, and easier hunts. The Ice Age had not become gentle. It was still merciless, still deadly. But for the first time in human history, a tribe could walk into the white silence of a midwinter plain, hear the wind howl, and know it was walking into their territory. And the cold, which had once been the great executioner, now served as their silent ally. The proof of mastery came in migration. When other species huddled in familiar valleys, clinging to what scraps of warmth they could find, humans began moving outward, into harsher, more unforgiving lands. Places where the cold was so deep it froze the air in your nostrils. Places where the nights could last for weeks. Places that, for thousands of years, had been untouched by human footprints. They went anyway. They carried their knowledge with them like treasure. How to build shelters from snow in under an hour. How to keep a fire alive through the wettest storms. How to wrap their bodies so tightly in layers that the cold could only circle them, never touch their skin. With every journey, they refined the system. Furs were not just worn, they were engineered. Hides were smoked to repel moisture. Seams were double-stitched to block the wind. Boots were lined with grass or moss, replaced daily to keep them dry. Their diet became a direct weapon against the cold. High-fat meals before sleeping kept the body burning heat all night. Drinking hot broth at dawn primed the body for the day ahead. Even the marrow from a freshly cracked bone became a kind of instant energy source in the middle of a hunt. But the real key wasn't any one piece of clothing or meal. It was the understanding that cold was a constant opponent. The Stone Age tribes knew they couldn't beat it once and for all. They had to fight it every single day, in dozens of small ways. And that was the essence of their secret. Survival wasn't one grand act, but thousands of tiny victories stacked together. By living this way, they achieved something extraordinary. They could outlast the winter. Not just survive it, outlast it. And this endurance gave them a strategic edge no other predator had. They could wait out rivals. They could stalk herds over days, knowing the cold would tire the animals long before it wore down a prepared human. They could cross icy rivers and frozen plains to reach prey that would never expect an attack from the white horizon. It was here, in this merging of skill, preparation, and patience, that humans became the Ice Age's apex survivors. Not the biggest, not the fastest, not the strongest, but the most adaptable. And this mastery of the cold would do more than help them hunt. It would shape their destiny. Because the techniques they built here, in the frozen heart of the world, would not die with the Ice Age. They would echo forward through migrations, through generations, through the very shape of our bodies, and into the lives we live today. The further humans traveled from the frozen heart of the Ice Age, the more this legacy adapted, but it never disappeared. In the warm valleys of the Near East, where winters were mild, people still kept the knowledge alive. Fires still burned through the night, not because death was hours away, but because memory whispered that the dark could be dangerous. People still gathered close, still built shelters to hold heat, still passed down the art of preparing for the worst. In the far north, the adaptations became even more extreme. Among the ancestors of the Inuit, the Sami, and the Chukchi, the Stone Age secret became a way of life. Clothes were no longer just protection, they were engineering, designed to trap every breath of warmth. Tools weren't just for hunting. They were for building snow shelters that could hold heat like a clay oven. And here's the thing, it wasn't just about tools, or clothing, or fire. It was about anticipation. Humans who survived the cold were the ones who could imagine a danger before it arrived. Who could see a snowstorm coming in the movement of clouds? Who could prepare days ahead for a freeze that would kill the unready? This foresight didn't vanish when the climate warmed. It's in you right now. The same brain that planned a winter's survival now plans your career, your future, your next move. Evolution trained us to think beyond the moment, because in the Ice Age, thinking only about today was fatal. Even your blood carries echoes of that era. In colder regions, generations of adaptation gave rise to people whose bodies could conserve heat more efficiently, whose extremities could resist frostbite longer, whose metabolism could ramp up in the cold to generate precious warmth. You may not live on the tundra anymore, but somewhere in your ancestry, someone did, and their survival became your inheritance. But the most overlooked part of this legacy isn't physical at all. It is emotional. Cold is isolation. Cold is silence. It strips away distractions and forces you to confront the essentials: food, fire, shelter, and the people beside you. In that crucible, bonds between humans became unbreakable. You didn't survive the Ice Age by being the strongest alone. You survived by being part of a circle where each person's fire could save another. That's why even now, in a heated apartment in a city far from the tundra, a part of you still feels something when the temperature drops. It's not just discomfort, it's memory. Not yours, but your species. A deep, ancient recognition that winter is not just a season, but a test. The Stone Age secret was never one thing. It was a system, a mindset, a set of instincts, a physical inheritance, and a social code. Together, they turned a fragile primate into a creature that could not only endure the cold, but master it. The legacy in your veins, you carry the Ice Age inside you, not in your memories. Those are long gone. But in your bones, in your blood, and the way your body responds to the cold without you even thinking about it. When you step outside on a winter morning and feel your skin tighten, when you start to shiver without meaning to, that's the same reflex that kept your ancestors alive on the tundra. Shivering isn't weakness. It's your muscles creating heat, the same way it did for the hunters who crossed frozen valleys, chasing mammoth herds. Even the fat in your body is a relic of that age. Today, we fight it, burn it, try to sculpt it away. But once, that stored energy was the thin, precious barrier between life and death. Your body still remembers this. It still holds on to energy in the cold, just as it did for those who wore furs stitched with bone needles thousands of years ago. Your skin, too, is part of that legacy. In freezing temperatures, your blood vessels narrow, not because the body is failing, but because it's prioritizing heat for your vital organs. This is an evolutionary blueprint, passed down from people who knew that saving the heart and brain was worth sacrificing the fingertips. And here's the part we don't often think about. The Ice Age didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our minds. Those ancient winters taught humans to think ahead, to anticipate problems before they happened. That mental wiring still runs deep. When you grab a coat before leaving the house, when you stock up on food before a storm, you're acting out the same survival scripts your ancestors wrote in snow and blood. Even our social instincts bear the mark of the cold. In the Ice Age, warmth wasn't just physical, it was communal. A single fire could keep a whole group alive. Cooperation wasn't kindness, it was survival. That's why, even now, humans feel safer and stronger in groups, especially when danger or hardship comes. The Stone Age secret wasn't just a clever trick for one tribe in one winter. It was a complete transformation in how humans approached the most hostile force on Earth. And once that transformation began, it never stopped. It turned the cold from a predator into a test humans could pass again and again. And because of that, we are here, every single one of us. But the true beauty of this legacy is that it didn't end when the Ice Age did. It kept evolving, carried forward in migrations across continents, woven into the survival of every generation that came after. But mastery came at a cost. The cold shaped not just our survival, it shaped our character. When you live in a land where winter can kill in a single night, you learn patience. You learn to store more than you think you'll need, to mend tools before they break, to prepare when the sun is still high and the skies are still clear. This discipline, born from necessity, forged a quiet strength in our ancestors, the kind that doesn't seek attention, but ensures survival. It also forged humility. No matter how skilled you were, no matter how clever, the cold could still take you. You could light a perfect fire, wrap yourself in the warmest furs, and yet, if the wind rose, if the snow trapped you, if the ice gave way beneath your feet, nature would remind you who was in control. This wasn't weakness, it was perspective. You didn't conquer the cold by defying it. You survived by respecting it. Generations of this dance between fear and preparation etched itself into the human psyche. That's why so many of our ancient myths, from the frost giants of Norse legend to the ice spirits of Siberia, speak of winter as a living force. To our ancestors, cold wasn't just a temperature. It was an opponent, one that demanded cunning, cooperation, and willpower. And here's the strange part. Even in the modern world, that opponent still visits. It's no longer just in blizzards or frostbite. It's in the metaphorical winters of life. When the job is gone, when the bank account is empty, when the world seems indifferent to your struggle, in those moments, the same instincts rise. Plan, conserve, endure, and wait for the thaw. The Stone Age secret was more than a physical adaptation. It was a mental blueprint, and we still follow it, even if we no longer see the connection. We prepare for the winters of our lives, without even realizing we inherited that skill from people who sat around a fire 20,000 years ago, telling stories to keep the darkness at bay. But there's a danger now, a danger they never faced. Comfort, central heating, thick jackets, supermarkets. All of them make it easier to survive the cold. But they also make it easier to forget the lessons the cold once taught us. We no longer feel the bite of frost as a teacher. We no longer see winter as an adversary. And when you forget an enemy, you become vulnerable again. Because the truth is, the cold isn't gone. It still exists, not just in the environment, but in the unexpected disasters, the sudden losses, the unplanned storms of life. And when those arrive, the ones who still carry the Stone Age mindset will endure. The rest will freeze, not from temperature, but from shock. Teaching the cold the first lesson was never given in words. There was no language strong enough, no speech long enough, to explain the cold. You learned it with your skin. You learned it with your breath turning to ice before your eyes. You learned it when your fingers refused to move, when your teeth chattered so hard they ached, when the air itself stung like needles. In the Ice Age, every child became a student of the cold the moment they took their first step outside the safety of the firelight. The older hunters and gatherers didn't lecture. They demonstrated the way they stacked wood before the sun dropped, the way they layered furs so no wind could slip through, the way they cupped their hands around a spark and coaxed it into flame. Even in the cruelest wind, these were lessons carved into the eyes of the young, but survival training didn't stop with observation. The elders tested them. A young boy might be sent to fetch water from a frozen stream, knowing the ice would cut his skin raw. A girl might be told to help scrape hides in the snow until her fingers burned from the cold, learning the feel of when numbness began to creep in, and when to stop before frostbite claimed her. The purpose wasn't cruelty, it was inoculation. Just as a body becomes immune to disease through exposure, the mind became immune to fear of the cold through controlled suffering, and always, there was the fire. The fire wasn't just warmth, it was the beating heart of the camp, the center of learning, the source of life. Around it, the elders would show how to dry wet fur without burning it, how to bank embers so the flames would survive the night, how to choose the right kindling when snow covered everything. You didn't just know how to make fire, you knew how to think like fire, to protect it, to feed it, to see it not as a tool, but as a living ally. This was the true Stone Age secret, not the fire itself, but the relationship with it, and it wasn't just about heat. It was about mindset, the ability to create, sustain, and protect the one thing standing between you and death. By the time a child became an adult, they had felt winter's teeth enough times to stop fearing the first bite. They could read the wind like others read words, sense the change in temperature before frost formed, and hear danger in the sound of ice cracking underfoot. They didn't just survive winter, they carried winter inside them, and that meant winter could never surprise them. The boy was no longer a boy, at least, that's what the elders had decided. He had passed the smaller trials, fetching water from the frozen stream, enduring hours of wind on the ridge without complaint, starting a fire from embers buried in snow. But these were lessons under the shadow of the campfire. Now came the trial that stripped away the camp, the elders, the safety of many hands. The first solo winter. It began at dawn. The air was so cold that the mist of his breath froze in his fur hood. They gave him no tent, no pile of extra wood, no endless stores of food, just a stone knife, a bow, a small skin pouch of flint and dried moss, and enough dried meat for a single day. The rest he would have to find. They sent him into the white silence. The snow was not just deep, it was alive. It moved underfoot, swallowed his steps, pulled at his legs with every movement. The wind didn't just blow, it hunted. It searched for openings in his furs, trying to worm its way into his chest. By midday, the boy found his first test. The frozen river was his only source of water, but the ice was thick enough to swallow an axe head. He had no axe, only his stone knife. So he knelt and began to chip. Tiny shards of ice stung his cheeks as he worked. Minutes became an hour. His fingers began to throb, then burn, then dull into dangerous numbness. He remembered the elder's warning. Cold takes you in pieces. First your fingers, then your toes. Then it takes your will. He forced himself to stop, to warm his hands under his arms, to breathe into his mittens, until the blood returned in a painful rush. Then he chipped again, and again, until a small hole opened in the frozen skin of the river. The water beneath was dark, moving, alive. That night, the real battle began. The fire was everything. Without it, the cold would eat through his furs and into his bones before dawn. But snow kills flame faster than water, and the wind steals sparks before they can take hold. He built his fire pit in the hollow of a snowdrift, scraping down to the hard earth, shielding it with walls of packed ice. Flint struck against steelstone once, twice, a dozen times. Finally, a spark caught the moss. It was a fragile thing, so small it could be smothered by a sigh. But the boy cupped it like a living animal, feeding it slivers of bark until it breathed on its own. The moment the flames rose above his hands, something in his chest eased. That night, he learned the truth of the elder's words. You do not beat the cold by fighting it. You beat the cold by outlasting it. And outlasting it meant never letting the fire die. Not outside, and not inside. By the second night, The cold was no longer the only thing pressing on him, it was the silence. The kind of silence that made the crackle of his own fire sound like an intruder. The kind that pressed against his ears until his own heartbeat felt too loud. In the camp, silence never came. There was always the snore of an elder, the distant laughter of children, the shuffle of fur and bone as someone moved in the dark. Out here, the stillness felt unnatural, like something was holding its breath, listening. The boy understood why the elders called it the Watcher. Not a spirit, exactly, but a presence. You could go mad listening for it. He kept his fire alive through the night, feeding it scraps of wood he had gathered before dusk. Every time the flames dimmed, he imagined the cold creeping closer, sliding like smoke toward his furs. His eyes stung from staying open, from scanning the shadows beyond the snow walls. It was then that the first sound came. Faint, distant, carried on the wind. Not the snap of a branch, not the crack of ice. Something softer. A low, deliberate crunch. Then stillness. Predators in winter did not waste energy. If something was moving toward him, it had a reason. The boy slid his bow into his lap, nocked an arrow and waited. His breath plumed in the firelight. His ears strained against the cold, but the sound never came again. Only the silence returned, heavier than before. By morning, his muscles ached from tension. He needed food. The dried meat was gone. His stomach was a tight, gnawing knot. Tracks in the snow were rare. Most animals had gone to ground or moved far south. But a set of tiny prints led into the sparse trees nearby. Rabbit. It took hours of slow, frozen movement to get close enough. He crouched in the snow, arrow drawn, waiting for the rabbit to turn just enough to expose its side. His fingers screamed with cold against the bowstring. When he released, the arrow flew straight, a clean strike. But as he reached the kiln, he saw something else in the snow, a much larger print. Not human, not bear. The claws were too long, the pad too wide, the weight deep in the snow as if the creature carried more muscle than a wolf. Whatever had been out there last night had not gone far, and now, it knew he was here. The boy carried the rabbit back to his snow hollow, but the meat no longer felt like victory, it felt like bait, and not in his favor. That night, the silence returned. Only now it had footsteps in it. The boy's breathing is ragged now. His bare feet slip in the wet moss as he scrambles higher, chasing the thin ribbon of light filtering through the canopy. Behind him the forest swallows the sound of pursuit, but not entirely. There the faint snap of a twig, the low, deliberate exhale of something that knows it has time. He stumbles into a clearing. The rain has stopped, but the mist clings low, hiding the ground in a ghostly haze. His chest heaves. For a heartbeat, he believes he's safe. Then movement. Not a rush, not a lunge. Just a shadow shifting at the edge of the fog. Too large to be a man, too silent to be prey. The boy's grip tightens on his sharpened stick, the only weapon between him and the thing that has been watching him since before he knew it was there. The air is still, no wind, no bird calls, only the sound of his own pulse, pounding like a war drum in his ears. He knows deep in the marrow of his bones that if he turns and runs now, he will not see another dawn. So he stands, bare, shaking but with fire in his eyes. And somewhere in the fog, something steps closer. The hunt is not over. If you can still feel your heart racing, then you've taken the first step into the world of our ancestors, a place where fear was a teacher, and survival was the only law. Out here, every shadow has a story, and every sound could be the last thing you hear. Join echoes of the hunt. Follow the trail, hear the stories, learn the skills. Because the predators of the past may be gone, but their lessons are still hunting you. If this story has made you curious about the mysteries of prehistory, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Each week, we will travel back in time together, exploring the wild world and untold stories. And don't forget to share this video so that more people can embark on this amazing journey. Who knows? Next time, you will be the one standing by the fire, facing primitive people in the dark.